Daniel believed he had everything a man could ask for. He wasn't the richest man in the city, nor was he the most powerful, but he had what he thought truly mattered. A comfortable job, a wife he loved deeply, and a best friend who had stood by him through thick and thin. To him, this life was perfect. Every morning he woke up beside Sarah, his beautiful wife, and every evening he often caught up with Mark, his childhood friend. Daniel trusted them both more than anyone else in the world. In his eyes, Sarah was his heart and Mark was his brother. He could never imagine a betrayal from either of them. But sometimes the people closest to us carry the sharpest knives. It all began on a rainy Thursday night. Daniel had been working late at the office, or at least that's what Sarah thought. But by some stroke of chance, his boss told him to leave early. The company's systems had gone down, and there was nothing more he could do. So Daniel packed his bag, left the office 2 hours earlier than usual, and drove home through the wet streets. He even thought about surprising Sarah with her favorite dessert from the bakery on the corner. His heart was light. His mind was filled with thoughts of a cozy evening with his wife. When he arrived at his home, he noticed something strange. The curtains were drawn tight, though Sarah never closed them that early. The living room lights were dim, and instead of the TV playing loudly like it usually did, there was silence. At first, Daniel thought Sarah might be asleep. But then he heard it. A faint sound, almost like a giggle, coming from upstairs. Confused, Daniel set his briefcase down quietly and climbed the stairs. His heart was calm at first, but as he got closer to the bedroom, the sound became clearer. It wasn't just a giggle. It was laughter, whispered voices. The sound of his wife speaking in a tone he hadn't heard in years. A soft, playful tone. Daniel's chest tightened. Slowly, carefully, he stopped at the half-open bedroom door. What he heard next shattered everything inside him. It was Sarah. Her voice was soft, sweet, filled with affection. "Mark, what if Daniel finds out? What will we do?" And then another voice answered, the one Daniel trusted like his own. Mark, his best friend. The man who had been there when Daniel's father died, who had stood beside him at his wedding, who had laughed with him countless nights over drinks. That same voice whispered back, "He'll never know, Sarah. He's too blind. Besides, he trusts us. We can keep this going. One day, it will just be you and me." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he thought his ears were lying. Maybe he was tired, maybe he was imagining things. But then Sarah laughed softly, and Mark laughed with her. The sound pierced his heart like a blade. Daniel stood frozen, his world collapsing in silence. He wanted to burst into the room, to scream, to throw them out, to demand answers. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and rage burned inside him. But something inside him, something colder, sharper, stopped him. Instead of barging in, Daniel slowly pulled out his phone. With trembling hands, he pressed the record button. His heart hammered against his chest as he captured every word, every giggle, every whispered promise of betrayal. The device shook slightly in his grip, but his mind was already changing. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was becoming something else, someone who would not scream, but someone who would plan. As he stood there in the hallway, listening to the people he loved most betraying him, Daniel felt two things at once: unbearable pain and a strange, dangerous calm. Tears burned his eyes, but his lips curled into the faintest, bitterest smile. He now knew the truth. Sarah, the woman he had given his heart, had betrayed him with Mark, the man he called brother. Quietly, Daniel stepped back from the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. His body wanted to collapse, to cry out, to demand answers. But his mind whispered something else. Not now. Not yet. Let them think they're safe. He walked down the stairs as silently as he had come up. He picked up his briefcase, slipped on his shoes, and left the house without making a sound. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside him, a storm was rising. He sat in his car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The recording was still running. The voices still played in his ears. Sarah's giggles, Mark's promises, the two people he loved most plotting behind his back. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his hands covering his face. He wasn't just heartbroken. He was broken in a way he had never thought possible. Yet, behind the tears, another thought began to form, something darker. They think I'm blind. They think I'll never know. They think they've fooled me, but they don't know me at all. They don't know what I can do when pushed too far. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt something he had never felt before. The hunger for revenge. It was quiet at first, a whisper in the back of his mind. But as the night grew colder, that whisper grew louder, stronger, until it was the only thing he could hear. He played the recording again, letting every cruel word burn deeper into his soul. Each laugh from Sarah cut him like glass. Each promise from Mark added fuel to the fire inside him. And slowly Daniel stopped crying. His hands stopped shaking. His heart, though shattered, began to harden. By the time he started the car and drove into the night, Daniel had made his decision. He would not confront them tonight. He would not scream or beg for answers. No, he would let them continue in their lies, believing he was blind, believing he was weak. He would let them dig their own graves. Because when the time came, he would not just expose them. He would destroy them. He would take away everything they had stolen from him. And when he was finished, Sarah and Mark would have nothing, not even a roof over their heads. That night, Daniel's perfect life ended. But something new was born in its place. Something sharper, something colder. Daniel, the loving husband and loyal friend, died in that hallway. In his place stood a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain by watching his betrayers fall. And as he drove away, the rain began to fall again, washing the streets clean. But no storm could wash away what Sarah and Mark had done. No storm could erase the memory of their laughter behind that door. The audience is left with one burning question. What will Daniel do now? Will he forgive, or will he destroy? The answer is already written in his heart, and it is darker than they could ever imagine. Daniel woke up the next morning, but nothing felt the same. The sunlight came through the curtains like every other day, yet for him the world had turned dark. His wife, Sarah, greeted him with a warm smile, pretending everything was normal. She kissed his cheek, poured him a cup of coffee, and asked about his work. To anyone else, it would seem like a normal morning between husband and wife. But Daniel knew the truth. Behind that smile was betrayal. Behind those soft words was a woman who had stabbed his heart. As Sarah placed breakfast on the table, Daniel watched her closely. She looked beautiful just as she always had. Her hair tied neatly, her hands moving gracefully, her voice calm and gentle. But now, all Daniel could hear in his head was her laughter with Mark. The same lips that told him, "I love you," had whispered promises to his best friend. The same hands that served him breakfast had touched someone else in the dark. Every movement of hers now carried poison. Daniel ate quietly, nodding when she spoke, pretending everything was fine. He forced a smile, though inside he felt broken. But this was his plan now. He would not let her see his pain. He would not let her know he had found out. He wanted her to believe her secret was safe, so she would continue to reveal herself. When he left for work, Sarah kissed him at the door, whispering, "Have a good day, darling." Daniel looked into her eyes and almost laughed bitterly. "Good day? You destroyed my days already," he thought silently. But he said nothing. He simply smiled, turned, and walked to his car. All day at work, Daniel's mind wasn't on his job. The voices from the night before replayed in his head again and again. He remembered Mark's words. "He'll never know. He's too blind." Those words burned him more than anything. His best friend thought of him as a fool, a weak man who couldn't see the truth. But Daniel wasn't weak. He wasn't blind. He was patient. That evening, Daniel decided to test Sarah. He told her he might have to work late, though he left the office at his usual time. Instead of going home, he parked his car a few streets away and walked quietly back toward his house. His heart pounded as he approached. Through the living room window, he saw the lights on. He heard voices inside, 2 voices. It was Sarah and Mark. They were laughing together, sitting close on the couch, completely unaware that Daniel was only a few steps away. Daniel's stomach turned, but his face remained calm. He pulled out his phone again, recording the scene through the glass, making sure every word, every laugh was captured. He stayed long enough to know what he needed. They were continuing their affair without fear. Then, without making a sound, he walked back to his car and drove off into the night. Daniel's silence became his greatest weapon. He started to live two lives. To Sarah and Mark, he was still the same Daniel. Busy at work, kind at home, blind to the truth. But behind the mask, he was watching, waiting, collecting pieces of evidence like a hunter preparing for the final strike. Weeks passed this way. Sarah grew bolder, lying to Daniel's face without hesitation. "I have a meeting tonight," she would say, slipping out in a new dress. Daniel would nod, smile, and kiss her goodbye, though deep inside he knew exactly where she was going. Sometimes she would come home late, pretending to be tired, and Daniel would pretend to be asleep. Other times, she would text Mark while sitting right beside Daniel on the couch, her face glowing from the screen's light. She thought she was clever. She thought she was fooling him. But every text, every call, every lie only added fuel to the fire burning inside Daniel. Mark, too, played his role with ease. He still came to Daniel's house often, laughing, drinking, pretending to be the loyal friend. He looked Daniel in the eye and spoke about trust, about brotherhood, as if nothing had changed. Each time Mark shook his hand or slapped him on the back, Daniel felt the urge to expose him right there. But no, he stayed calm. He stayed patient. Revenge was not something to waste in anger. It had to be planned, sharp, and unforgettable. Late at night, when Sarah was asleep, Daniel would sit alone in his study, staring at the evidence he had collected. Dozens of recordings, screenshots of Sarah's messages, even pictures of her meeting Mark in secret places. Each file was like a knife, sharp and painful, but Daniel stored them carefully. He was building a case not for court but for destruction. The silence was painful. Every day, Daniel had to swallow his rage, bury his heartbreak, and act normal. He had to listen to Sarah's lies, endure Mark's fake friendship, and keep his face calm. It was torture, but Daniel endured it because he knew the end would be worth it. He imagined the day he would finally reveal everything, the day Sarah and Mark's smiles would disappear, the day their world would crumble just like his had. That thought kept him alive. That thought gave him strength. But inside, the pain was real. There were nights Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the two people he loved most could betray him so easily. He had given Sarah his heart, his loyalty, his years. He had shared his childhood, his secrets, his life with Mark. And now, both had turned against him. Sometimes, Daniel clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, trying not to cry out. Other times, tears fell silently, soaking his pillow while Sarah slept peacefully beside him, unaware of the storm inside his chest. One night, Sarah rolled over in her sleep and rested her hand on his chest. For a moment, Daniel almost broke. He almost shook her awake and screamed, "Why? Why did you do this to me?" But he stopped himself. He turned his face away, swallowed his tears, and reminded himself, "Not yet. Wait, the silence will end when the time is right." And so Daniel's days continued, heavy with pain but sharp with planning. He was no longer the blind husband or the trusting friend. He was a man with a mission, a man who had nothing left to lose. Every smile he gave Sarah was fake. Every handshake with Mark was a lie. Every word of kindness he spoke was part of his mask. And beneath that mask, the fire of revenge grew brighter and hotter. Daniel knew one thing for certain. The silent pain he carried now would soon become their pain. The tears he shed in secret would soon be theirs to cry in the open. They thought they had fooled him, but in truth, he was fooling them. The hunter was waiting. The prey did not even know they were being hunted. And when the silence finally broke, Sarah and Mark would wish they had never crossed him. Daniel's life became a game of masks. To the world, he was still the same calm man, living with his loving wife, spending weekends with his loyal best friend. But inside, he was no longer the same. He was a man with broken trust and a burning desire for revenge. Each day, he played his role perfectly, never letting Sarah or Mark sense that he knew their secret. And the more they believed in his blindness, the bolder they became. Sarah began talking more about money. She told Daniel that they needed a bigger house, a better lifestyle, something that matched their status. Daniel found it strange because just months ago, Sarah had been content with the cozy home they already had. But now she kept bringing up investments, bank loans, and property deals. She smiled sweetly, acting like she was only thinking about their future, but Daniel could see through the sweetness. He knew her words were poisoned with lies. One evening, Sarah sat across from Daniel at the dinner table, her eyes glowing with excitement. "There's this new house I saw," she said, pretending her voice was casual. "It's perfect, Daniel. Spacious, modern, in a great neighborhood. We should think about it." Daniel chewed slowly, pretending to consider her words. "And how much does it cost?" he asked calmly. Sarah's smile flickered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "It's expensive, yes, but we can manage. With your salary, some savings, maybe a small loan, we can make it work." Daniel nodded slowly, hiding his smirk behind his fork. He knew the truth. This wasn't about their future. It was about her future with Mark. She wanted Daniel's money to build a life with another man. She wanted him to unknowingly pay for his own destruction. But Daniel wasn't blind anymore. That night, when Sarah went to bed, Daniel sat alone in his study and went through the property documents Sarah had conveniently left lying around. He noticed something unusual. The papers listed both his name and hers, but the way they were drafted would allow her to remove his rights later with just a signature trick. It was clever, too clever for Sarah alone, which meant Mark was helping her. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "They think they can steal from me. They think they can build a future with my money." His eyes hardened. "They're building their web of lies. But they don't know. I am already weaving my own web around them." The very next day, Daniel visited a lawyer in secret. He quietly shifted the ownership rights of his current house fully to his name, without Sarah knowing. Then he contacted the property dealer Sarah had been speaking with and arranged for everything to appear as if he was agreeing to her plan. But in reality, every contract, every document, was being carefully altered to protect him and trap her. Meanwhile, Mark was busy playing the helpful friend. He often came over, pretending to advise Daniel about investments. "You've got to think about the future, brother," Mark would say, his tone smooth, his smile wide. "You should buy property now, when the market is good. Sarah's right, you too deserve something bigger." Daniel nodded along, acting grateful for the advice. "You're right, Mark. Maybe I'll take your suggestion." Inside, Daniel's blood boiled every time he heard Mark speak. But on his face he wore only calmness. He let Mark believe his lies were working. Days turned into weeks, and the affair between Sarah and Mark grew deeper. Sarah would leave the house saying she had meetings, while Daniel secretly tracked her phone and saw her meeting Mark at hotels or quiet cafes. Sometimes he even followed them from a distance, recording every detail. Each piece of evidence was another thread in the web he was spinning. But it wasn't just Sarah who was tangled. Mark's own life was starting to unravel. Daniel discovered something important. Mark was drowning in debt. He owed money to lenders, his job performance was slipping, and he was desperate for financial stability. That was why he clung to Sarah. She wasn't just a lover to him, she was a ticket to survival. With Daniel's money, Mark could pay off his debts and start fresh. Daniel now saw their entire plan clearly. Sarah wanted security. Mark wanted money. Together, they wanted to destroy him and walk away with everything he had worked for. But what they didn't know was that every step they took in their plan was actually leading them straight into Daniel's trap. The lies around Daniel grew thicker. Sarah would hug him sweetly in front of neighbors, whispering, "I love you," while texting Mark the moment she turned away. Mark would sit across from Daniel at the bar, talking about loyalty and friendship, while secretly planning how to steal his life. It was a web of deceit so twisted that anyone else would have fallen blind into it. But not Daniel. One night, Sarah returned home late, smelling faintly of Mark's cologne. Daniel sat in the living room, pretending to be asleep on the couch. She tiptoed past him, her shoes in her hand, her phone buzzing softly in her purse. Daniel's eyes stayed shut, but his mind was wide awake. He had captured her every move in his memory. As Sarah disappeared into the bedroom, Daniel opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. The silence of the house was heavy, but in his heart, the fire of revenge burned brighter than ever. He whispered softly to himself, "Keep lying, Sarah. Keep playing your game, Mark. I'll let you both believe you're winning. But when the time comes, I will take everything from you." And so, the web of lies grew, each thread tighter, each deception deeper. Sarah thought she was clever. Mark thought he was in control. But in truth, Daniel was the spider, waiting patiently as they trapped themselves further in the web he had woven. The stage was being set. The lies were piling up. The betrayal was reaching its peak. And soon, very soon, Daniel would pull the strings and watch his betrayers fall. Daniel had waited long enough. The pain of betrayal still sat heavy in his chest, but he was no longer blinded by it. He had turned that pain into focus, into planning, into a weapon sharper than any knife. For weeks he had stayed silent, collecting evidence, studying Sarah and Mark's every move, weaving his web of revenge thread by thread. And now it was time to pull them into the center of it. Sarah was still pushing Daniel about the new house. She brought it up almost every day, sometimes gently, sometimes with irritation, saying things like, "Daniel, don't you think we deserve better? Don't you want us to live in comfort?" Daniel always responded calmly, pretending to agree. "Yes, Sarah, you're right. We'll make it happen soon." His soft tone fooled her every time. She thought her plan was moving forward. Mark, on the other hand, was growing impatient. His debts were chasing him harder, his creditors knocking at his door. He called Sarah more often, pressuring her to make Daniel finalize the deal faster. "We need the money, Sarah," he whispered one night over the phone. "If he delays more, we'll be stuck." Sarah, unaware that Daniel had installed a hidden recorder in her purse, replied, "Don't worry, I'll convince him. He trusts me too much. He'll sign the papers without thinking." Daniel listened to that recording alone in his study and smiled. A cold, sharp smile. They believe they are so close to victory. They don't know the real trap is waiting for them. The idea for his revenge came to Daniel slowly, but once it formed, it became crystal clear. He decided not just to expose Sarah and Mark, but to humiliate them in such a way that everyone they knew would see their betrayal. It wouldn't be enough for him to confront them privately. No, he wanted the world to see what they had done. He wanted to rip off their masks in front of everyone, leaving them with no place to hide. So Daniel began preparing carefully. He booked a weekend getaway at a beautiful countryside villa, telling Sarah he wanted to celebrate their marriage and invite Mark as well. "It's been a long time since we all relaxed together," Daniel said, smiling warmly. Sarah's eyes lit up with fake joy. She thought the trip was just another chance for her to play the loyal wife while secretly enjoying Mark's presence. She immediately called Mark, and the two laughed over the phone, thinking Daniel was too blind to see the truth. In the days leading up to the trip, Daniel worked quietly behind the scenes. He arranged the villa with hidden cameras in the living room and dining hall. He synced the devices to his laptop so he could control what would appear on the big television screen in the villa. He organized all the evidence he had collected: videos, recordings, screenshots, bank transfers, and text messages, into a single file, ready to be played. Every giggle, every whisper, every betrayal was stored in his hand like bullets ready for fire. Finally, the weekend arrived. Sarah packed her bags excitedly, pretending it was just a romantic trip. "It's so thoughtful of you, Daniel," she said sweetly. "You always know how to make me happy." Daniel nodded, hiding the storm in his eyes. "Anything for you, Sarah." They drove to the villa together, and later that evening, Mark arrived, grinning widely, slapping Daniel on the back as if they were still brothers. "This is amazing, brother," Mark said. "We all needed this." Daniel forced a smile, his hands steady, his voice calm. "Yes, Mark. We all needed this. The villa was beautiful, with tall glass windows, a large dining table, and a fireplace glowing warmly. Sarah walked around admiring the place, while Mark poured drinks. The three of them sat together, laughing, chatting, playing their roles. But Daniel's mind was already counting down. He had prepared the trap, and soon it would spring shut. Dinner was served. They sat at the table, glasses raised. Daniel smiled and said, "Let's make a toast. To love, to friendship, and to the truth that always finds its way." Sarah chuckled, not understanding. Mark clinked his glass carelessly. And then, with one press of a button hidden under the table, Daniel brought the truth into the room. The large TV screen on the wall flickered to life. First, Sarah and Mark thought it was a movie. But then, their own voices filled the room. Sarah's laughter. Mark's whispers. "He'll never know. He's too blind." The recording Daniel had made that first night played loud and clear, echoing across the dining hall. Sarah froze, her face draining of color. Mark's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Their eyes darted to Daniel, who sat calmly, sipping his drink as if nothing unusual was happening. The recording continued. More clips, more whispers, more lies. Sarah's voice saying she would convince Daniel to buy the house. Mark's voice talking about debts. Photos appeared next, flashing across the screen. Sarah and Mark together at hotels, holding hands at cafes, smiling secretly when they thought no one was watching. The air grew heavy, silence broken only by the damning evidence playing for them to hear. Sarah's hands trembled, her lips moving soundlessly. Mark tried to stand, but his legs shook. "Daniel, this isn't what it looks like," Sarah stammered finally, her voice breaking. Daniel turned his eyes toward her, his gaze cold and empty. "It's exactly what it looks like, Sarah." Mark stepped forward, his voice rising in panic. "Listen, brother. I can explain." Daniel slammed his glass down on the table, the sharp sound cutting him off. His voice was calm but powerful. "Don't call me brother. You lost that right the moment you touched my wife." Sarah's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She tried to reach for Daniel's hand, but he pulled it back sharply. "You betrayed me, Sarah. You betrayed everything we built. And you thought I would never find out. But I've been watching. I've seen everything." Mark's face grew red with shame and fear. He looked around desperately, but there was no escape. The truth was everywhere. In the air, on the screen, in Daniel's eyes. For the first time, Sarah and Mark realized that Daniel was not blind. He was not weak. He had seen it all, and he had waited for the perfect moment to reveal it. The room was silent except for Sarah's sobs and Mark's heavy breathing. Daniel stood slowly, his presence towering over them. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "You thought you could build a future on my back, with my money, with my trust. But now everything you planned will crumble. And I will be the one to watch you fall." He turned and walked out of the dining hall, leaving Sarah and Mark trembling in their shame. Behind them, the screen kept playing the proof of their betrayal, their laughter now a haunting echo of everything they had lost. The trap had been set, and Sarah and Mark had walked into it blindly. But Daniel wasn't finished yet. This was only the first strike. The real revenge was still waiting. The night Daniel exposed Sarah and Mark in front of everyone was only the beginning. Sarah cried, screamed, and begged him not to do this. But Daniel's face stayed calm, his eyes cold, like all his love for her had died the moment he caught her betrayal. Mark tried to shout at Daniel, calling him a liar, but the evidence was right there on the big screen. Every message, every photo, every detail of their affair. The friends who had gathered for the dinner couldn't believe it. Some shook their heads, some left the room in silence, and others whispered to each other, disgusted at Sarah and Mark's betrayal. That night destroyed them in public, but Daniel wasn't finished. He knew humiliation was only the first step. The next morning, Sarah woke up thinking she would fight for the house, for the money, for something. But when she checked the papers Daniel had prepared for their supposed investment, she realized the truth. Her name wasn't on anything. Everything was Daniel's, his money, his house, his accounts. She had nothing. Her plan to live off him with Mark had collapsed in an instant. Sarah tried to call Daniel, to yell at him, but he didn't answer. He had blocked her number, her emails, even cut off her credit cards. It was as if she didn't exist. Mark wasn't in a better position. After the exposure, rumors spread quickly at his workplace. People whispered that he was a snake, a cheater, someone who couldn't even stay loyal to his best friend. Daniel had quietly sent anonymous evidence of Mark's lies at work too. Proof of how Mark had faked numbers, stolen small amounts of company money, and used office resources for personal gain. Within a week, Mark was fired. His boss didn't even give him a chance to explain. With debts already piling up, losing his job was the final push. Loan collectors started knocking on his door, sending him threatening letters, calling him day and night. Sarah thought maybe they could start over, but she quickly realized no one wanted to be around her. Her so-called friends, who used to admire her lifestyle and marriage, now avoided her. They whispered behind her back. Mothers at the neighborhood gathering pulled their children away from her, afraid she might bring shame to them too. Sarah couldn't walk in the market without feeling eyes on her, judging, mocking. One evening, Sarah and Mark tried to move into Daniel's house together, thinking maybe they could force him to leave. But when they arrived, the locks had been changed. Daniel had filed for divorce and already obtained a restraining order. Sarah stood outside in the cold, her bags at her feet, Mark by her side, both of them looking like fools. Daniel opened the door once, only to look at them with blank eyes, then shut it slowly in their faces. That moment broke something in Sarah. She realized she had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her respect. Mark grew angrier every day. Without money, without a job, and with debts chasing him, he started shouting at Sarah. He blamed her for pushing him into this plan, for making him believe they could steal Daniel's life. Sarah shouted back, reminding him that he had chosen to betray his best friend. Their love, which once seemed exciting and passionate, turned into hatred and blame. Nights were filled with fights, days with hunger. They moved from one cheap room to another, borrowing money from whoever would listen, but doors kept closing on them. Daniel, meanwhile, lived peacefully. He didn't flaunt his victory, didn't boast. He just worked, slept better than ever, and carried himself with quiet strength. His colleagues admired him more, his friends respected him more. He was the man who had been betrayed and yet rose above it with dignity. That calm revenge, that silent strength, made his victory even greater. Sarah and Mark, on the other hand, kept falling lower and lower. Mark's car was taken by the bank. Sarah tried to apply for jobs, but her reputation followed her. People knew her story, no one trusted her. Even her own family refused to take her in, ashamed of what she had done. Slowly, the glamorous Sarah, who once wore expensive dresses and smiled proudly, became a broken woman with tired eyes, wearing old clothes and walking with her head down. One night, after another fight with Mark, Sarah sat alone in the darkness of their small rented room. She thought about Daniel, about how he had once loved her, trusted her, given her everything, and how she had thrown it all away for cheap promises and empty excitement. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she had not only lost Daniel but also lost herself. But regret couldn't change anything now. Daniel had made sure they couldn't rise again. His revenge wasn't loud. It was silent, cruel, and permanent. Sarah and Mark had built their betrayal on lies, and Daniel had pulled every stone away until they had nothing left but the ruins of their own choices. The fall was complete. They were no longer the smiling couple who had dreamed of stealing someone else's life. They were outcasts, whispers of shame, shadows of their former selves. And Daniel? He didn't even need to look back. His silence was the final punishment, his success the final knife. The story was not finished yet. The worst was still waiting. For Sarah and Mark, homelessness was only around the corner, and Daniel would be there to see it happen. Months had passed since Sarah and Mark's world had collapsed. They had gone from living comfortably to surviving day by day. At first, they thought it was just a rough patch, that things would somehow get better. But reality was crueler than they had ever imagined. Every door they knocked on slammed shut. Every friend they called for help suddenly became too busy. Every family member who once welcomed them now avoided their calls. They were truly alone. Sarah had sold her jewelry, piece by piece, just to buy food. Mark had pawned his watch and phone, once proud symbols of his lifestyle. Soon, even those small lifelines disappeared. They moved into a tiny rented room, sharing a stained mattress on the floor, living off cheap bread and instant noodles. Sarah, who once boasted about fancy dinners and luxury clothes, now waited in line for discount groceries, ashamed and tired. Mark, who once strutted with pride, now avoided creditors, hiding whenever someone knocked on the door. Meanwhile, Daniel lived a completely different life. His nights were peaceful, his mornings calm. He worked hard, but he also allowed himself to enjoy the simple things. Morning walks, reading, cooking in his quiet home. He no longer thought about Sarah with pain. Instead, he thought of her only as a lesson. His friends admired how he had handled everything with dignity. Some asked why he didn't destroy them completely, but Daniel would only smile and say, "Sometimes silence is the best punishment." But destiny wasn't finished with Sarah and Mark yet. Their fall still had one last stage. One evening, after another fight about money, their landlord finally lost patience. They had delayed rent for the third month. He stormed into their room, his voice echoing in the hallway, telling them to get out immediately. Sarah cried, begged him for a few more days, but he didn't care. He tossed their bags into the corridor, slammed the door shut, and left them standing with nowhere to go. That night, Sarah and Mark sat on the sidewalk with their suitcases. Cars rushed by, people glanced at them, but no one stopped. Sarah's eyes were swollen from crying, and Mark's face looked hollow from stress. They argued again, blaming each other, their voices sharp in the cold night air. Finally, exhausted, they fell silent. The truth was clear: they had no roof, no friends, no family. They were homeless. The next morning, Sarah tried to call Daniel. Her hands shook as she dialed his number, hoping maybe, just maybe, he would forgive her. But the line didn't even connect. Daniel had long blocked her, erasing her from his life. Mark tried to ask an old friend for a place to stay, but when the friend heard his voice, he hung up. Everyone knew their story, and no one wanted to be near them. For days, they wandered the streets, moving from one cheap motel lobby to another, begging the managers for a room they couldn't afford. Their clothes grew dirty, their faces tired. Sarah clutched her bag like it was her last treasure, while Mark's pride slowly crumbled. They slept on benches some nights, under a broken streetlight, pretending it was temporary. But deep inside, they knew it wasn't. And then, one evening, fate brought Daniel back into their lives. Daniel had just finished a meeting out of town and was driving home. The sun was setting, casting golden light on the streets. He stopped at a traffic light near a rundown motel. As he looked out his window, his eyes widened. There, standing outside the motel door with their suitcases, were Sarah and Mark. They looked nothing like the people he once knew. Their clothes were wrinkled, their hair messy, their faces pale. Sarah was arguing with the motel manager, begging for a cheaper room, while Mark stood behind her, looking defeated. Daniel's heart didn't race with anger or sadness this time. Instead, he felt a strange calmness. He rolled down his window just a little and watched them quietly. Sarah turned for a moment, her eyes meeting his. For a second, her face lit up with hope. She stepped forward, thinking maybe he would stop, maybe he would offer help. But Daniel didn't move. He looked at her with the same calm, cold eyes he had the night he closed the door in her face. Then, without a word, he rolled the window back up and slowly drove away. Sarah froze, her hand half raised as if reaching for him. Her lips trembled. Mark muttered something angry, but she didn't listen. She just stood there, watching the car disappear into the distance, realizing once and for all that Daniel would never come back for her. He had moved on, stronger than before, while she was left in the ruins of her own choices. As Daniel's car disappeared into the traffic, he felt no guilt, no pity, only peace. His revenge had never been about shouting, never about violence. It was about letting them destroy themselves with their own greed and betrayal. He hadn't lifted a hand after exposing them. Life had done the rest. And now, seeing them homeless, begging for shelter, he knew the circle was complete. That night, Sarah and Mark slept on the motel steps, too broke to afford a room, too ashamed to ask anyone else for help. Sarah cried silently, whispering Daniel's name, but no one heard her. Mark stared into the darkness, angry at everything, but powerless to change anything. They had lost everything: home, love, respect, money, and the one man who could have saved them had walked away forever. And somewhere far away, Daniel slept peacefully in his warm bed, free of their shadows. His silence had been the sharpest blade, his calm the deadliest revenge. Sarah and Mark were not just homeless, they were hopeless. The perfect ending to the perfect revenge. Subscribe for more videos.